As I had mentioned, if you don't see this feature line here where it should be, or you'll see the feature line drawn down to the 0, you need to redraw that feature line. Something's not right. So as long as it's up here along the surface, you'll see it. If you revolve the surface around, you'll see that it's up close to that surface, not anywhere shooting down to the 0 elevations. If it is, you might have to go back and redo a few of these steps. For the purposes of modeling, I'm going to go ahead and draw a line, a feature line, along the topper curve to represent the topper curve. So I'm going to go and draw myself a feature line, use a current layer, again, 3D feature lines, hit OK. Keeping an eye on that 0 coordinate, I need to make sure I'm going to start from this endpoint. And there we go again with a 0. And you'll find different ways of how to get it to work. You'll notice that if I'm hovering over here and find the endpoint of the feature line, if I hover over here, you'll find the endpoint of the yellow line, which is the curve at the 0 elevation. I need to make sure I'm working with the z's, which are somewhere in the 3,800 foot range. So I can either do this, or I can go over here and hit tab a couple of times so that it cycles through all the different options. However you want to do that, and it finds different elevations. This one's finding the one at the bottom, which is not the correct one. You see it over here that it was highlighting this one. So I'm going to hover over here, make sure I'm finding the right one. Very important step, by the way. There it is. The endpoint is right here. You'll see the 380731 and the coordinate readout. Select. And if it confirms the elevation that it found. If you ever see that specify elevation or and it says 0, something's not right. Stop and repeat the step. This is correct. Enter. And come back over here. And I'm going to draw this one over here again. I'm going to select this endpoint. I'm noticing that it says 380731. If yours doesn't, hit tab, select tab a couple of times to make sure you get that elevation. Select. It found it, and it calculated an elevation difference of 0 in this case. Now, remember, this is not an elevation, it's an elevation difference. So the elevation difference makes sense in that the elevation that I use here to here, the difference between those two is indeed 0. So I leave it at 0. Enter. There's nothing wrong with going to 3D every once in a while just to check it, make sure everything looks correct, make sure it's making sense. And you can kind of see how you can see the building, you can kind of see the sidewalk and that little ramp, I guess, the slope there for the curb. That's going to start making a little bit more sense. And that's exactly how it's going to show. Once you go to, let me show you the final grading plan. You're not going to have this yet on yours, but let me just show you what that's going to look like on the final product. So you'll see that little ramp there that's slanted. I combined those two words. That's funny. You can kind of see how it's slanted. So that's exactly what we're doing. We're already starting to build this corner, if you can see. And you can see that we still have a lot more work to do. But nonetheless, we're headed in the right direction. So as long as you can see that on your surface, on your feature lines, we don't have a surface yet, you are working on this correctly. So we should be on the right track. So you'll see how that's starting to develop already. Let's go back to the top view and let's continue. So now before I go too far, I've now established the elevation of the building based on this corner back in here at that existing ground, a little bit above existing. I'm going to draw myself a temporary feature line from the pavement elevation. Remember, the pavement is where water flows along the pavement, which is our gutter, same elevation. I'm going to draw myself a temporary feature line from this point to this point. Doesn't really matter where, just as long as it's roughly here, and hopefully we are within that same criteria. Remember, the criteria we have is a minimum of 0.5% grade, a maximum of 5% grade. So I'm going to draw myself a feature line temporarily snapping to nearest points along the feature line. Doesn't really matter where, as long as it's somewhere here, down to the existing ground elevation here. Once again, just to make sure and confirm that we are within the criteria. If that's the case, the building will stay at the same elevation. I will not have to change it. So we'll do that on the next video.